603rd Contact Sunday, the 14th of December 2014, 2:16 p.m. Translation is done by Solon and Ken. You
already waited long enough. Be greeted and welcome, Ptaah, my friend. Florena has reported to me last night that you wanted to come by today before the correction work.
My greeting to you also, Eduard. You have told Florena that Bernadette is busy with other things today, which is the time we usually turn ourselves to the correction work. Therefore, I thought that we two could talk earlier together with one another, which is why I am here just now.
That is also all right for myself, because instead of working on the computer, it is much more enjoyable for myself to have a conversation with you. And to begin, for this purpose, I likewise have the following. Last Tuesday, I have read this article in the Zürcher Oblander, whose contents relate to nitrogen, which has accumulated itself in the oceans. Already in 1989, Quetzal and I had a conversation in regard to the artificial fertilizers, and thus also about the nitrogen, even substances, which become irresponsibly applied by the human beings of the earth in the soils, in agriculture, and in gardening, and with that the soils, and also the brooks, rivers, seas, streams, and oceans, become contaminated. That was thus already around 25 years ago, in which case it was said at that time that the application of these substances must be forbidden, and everything must be given back to that which is natural. What we had talked about at that time, you can see from the following contact report excerpt from the 9th of November, 1989. Billy, already 25 years ago, y'all have had these recognitions and cleared myself up about the OSR 6 consequences we'll have from the misuse of artificial fertilizers, and therewith also the consequences of having the nitrogen in the oceans, seas, brooks, and rivers, and also in the agriculture and gardening, if these substances are not forbidden. Now finally, after 25 years, the terrestrial scientists have come upon that fact, that the nitrogen at least has concentrated itself in the oceans to such an extent that it acts detrimentally on the sea flora, wherewith, however, obviously still no public knowledge prevails about this, that also the living vesin in the bodies of water become ruined through the nitrogen accumulation.
That it is no longer changeable and sadly very unpleasant consequences will result from all that, also in regards to the forms of life in the bodies of water. The consequences, which alone emerge from the nitrogen abuse, can be very lasting. That applies in equal amounts also for all the other artificial fertilizer substances and growth stimulators, which irresponsibly become applied in the agriculture and in the gardening, whereby the soil in regard to the natural substances becomes fully impoverished and unfruitful. Consequently, they can still only become revitalized to life through artificial fertilizer substances and growth substances.
One must also not forget the soil compaction through heavy agricultural machines and gardening machines, through which the oxygen can no longer penetrate into the soil, and also the soil microorganisms, and the other essential soil. Life vesin die off, like however also the rain and snowmelt water can no longer sink down, which leads to ever more land inundation.
That's right, these are further serious factors which are not taken into consideration in the agriculture and in the gardening.
With a natural agriculture and similarly with gardening, no artificial fertilizers and no artificial growth fertilizers may become introduced into it, rather only pure natural substances, because otherwise the life-essential soil microorganisms die off and make the soil unfruitful and dead, so to say. If, however, edible plants shall become grown again on such soil, then it must first be cultivated again, which can only thereby happen through reactivating the soil through the supplementation of microorganisms and natural plant fertilizers. That applies also to our gardens and the greenhouse, which must be revamped, because it became falsely treated, and also became neglected, since I have handed over control regarding this years ago, and I have no longer maintained the garden and the greenhouse together with Silvano in the garden and greenhouse. Also, Quetzal has already weighed in about the condition of the garden and greenhouse. Subsequently, I now take control again and arrange everything in the right way, together with Silvano. The soils from the gardening and greenhouse must be cultivated and activated again. Natural substances are especially suited regarding this, which have been known as EM products. And now we use them in order to reactivate the leached-out soil, fully wild soil and soil with overgrown moss and weeds. Therefore, I have occupied myself with this matter especially lately, and I am pressed by Adela about it. That, amongst others, a Japanese agricultural professor by the name of Teruo Higa, who has made the so-called EM, that is to say effective microorganisms known to the Agricultural Congress through lectures, through which the soil can be cultivated again, and good harvests can be had. Regarding this, I have already transcribed something, which I want to read aloud to you, likewise the history of the EM effective microorganisms, as this is described in the book EM Compact by Dr. Eduard and Katharina Zschokke in short form as follows. This thus in regard to the EM, on which I have been pushed by Adela, and now I am striving for this, to bring our garden and our greenhouse into shape again, whose soils as a result of bad cultivation have become leached out and sick. A fact which could happen because, as I already said, I had laid the whole garden work in other hands and no longer toiled myself with that. When now, however, Quetzal gets agitated, annoyed, and has scolded, then nothing else remains to be done other than to dedicate myself again to the garden work and greenhouse work together with Silvano, at least in hindsight, that I give advice, and together with Silvano arrange everything, and also control everything consistently. And what I now want to say, however, also, wood and plants can become used for agriculture and gardening, and indeed therethrough, by which these substances become transformed through a burning into ashes. An elimination of materials into wood and plant ashes therefore follows, in which case these are applied as good fertilizer in the garden since time immemorial, at least still in places where the cognizance regarding this predominates. An amount of wood ashes can be produced at home in the open fireplace or wood oven, as also garden waste in the garden, like vegetable scraps and weeds, can be burned into plant ashes, and these can be used for fertilization, but sadly these days, the ashes mostly become carelessly disposed of as trash. Unfortunately, many human beings are not aware that one can integrate with these waste products, in many cases also in the garden, and into the agriculture as valuable fertilizers. In order to get clean wood ashes or plant ashes, which is proper for the fertilization of the garden, one should already respect some fundamental rules by the fire-making, because it begins already by the kindling of the fire, for which only certain kinds of paper shall be used, which are neither lacquered nor treated with strong chemicals. Newspapers, which are printed only in black and white, that is to say normally is printed in black, applies as a good choice. Such paper is, as a rule, only treated sparingly, and the printing ink, by which the paper is inscribed, is produced from carbon pigments. Such kinds of newspapers leave behind no damaging residues after the burning. Subsequently, such printed paper is well suited as fertilizer, if it becomes burned into ashes. High glossy catalogs as well as papers, which are formed through color printing or multicolor printing, are chemically treated and contain heavy metals and other poisonous elements after the burning, through which the ashes are laden with unnecessary damaging substances, wherefore they should not be used for kindling of fire and should also not find usage as ashes. However, also untreated cardboards can be used for the kindling of the wood fire or plant fire, wherewith it, however, must be paid attention to that no plastic sticker tape sticks to the cardboard, because if such are burned with it, then they damage the quality of the ashes. Untreated and or unprinted and uncolored cardboards are recognizable in the brown matting color, wherewith also the carbon pigments of the black writing contain no damaging substances. By the choosing of the wood and the plants, it must be paid attention to that only wood, left natural, and plant parts become used for ash production. Wood, which is chemically treated, or lacquered for example, like also plants, which are chemically treated, often show a very high toxin level. In such ashes, heavy metals exist like lead, chromium, nickel, or cadmium, and so on. Ashes from stone coals should not be used as fertilizer, and also should not be mixed with wood coals or plant coals, while the coals likewise contain damaging substance content, like for example sulfuric oxide, which are introduced into the ashes. If the wood, however, is untreated, all sorts of wood can be used for producing wood ashes, and these then can be used for fertilization. Actually also, clean wood ashes and plant ashes contain many important elements, like calcium hydroxide lime, calcium, phosphate, and iron, and so on, which are well suited for the fertilizations of the garden and of the land. And one must be aware that ashes are strongly basic, which means that they neutralize acidic soils. Thus, they are very well suited in order to improve the buffer capacity with overly acidic soils, wherewith, however, bog bed plants, like for example rhododendrons, should not be fertilized with that, because these love acidic soils.
You speak in our sense of an elimination of wood and plants in order to transform it into ash. The Earth human beings sadly understand something false in correlation with elimination, because they bring this term into connection with death and complete annihilation, which, however, corresponds to a fully false wise of understanding, for which reason we should still clarify more about that. However, first this. Wood ashes and plant ashes unfold very effectively as a natural fertilizer, each of their effects according to its kind, because they dissolve themselves very fast and penetrate well into the soil. In order to not over-fertilize the garden, one should use an approximate value of 300 grams per square meter, that is to say 3 kilogram per 10 square meter per year, and should not be exceeded. With this amount, the nutritional requirements of the soil is well covered.
Ashes can also be incorporated into the compost. Therefore, if wood ashes are obtained from untreated wood, and plant ashes are obtained from untreated vegetable scraps and from weeds, then these can also become used for composting, while the ashes positively influence the composting process. And indeed then, if the ashes become worked into the compost in layers and in small amounts. However, how it stands with the heavy metals, which are contained in the wood ashes and plant ashes, that I do not know.
Heavy metals, which become incorporated by means of ash into the compost or garden, that is to say into the soil, are not and indeed in no wise questionable. The heavy metal, which trees, vegetables, and plants extract from the biosphere, corresponds to a natural heavy metal burden which is introduced into the soil through rain, snow, and wind, in which case this is practically identical with the concentration in the wood, ash, and vegetable ash. Insofar as this is made for private usage, you do not have to worry.
According to my knowledge in Switzerland, wood ashes must be disposed of in a stupid wise as house trash, at least in cities. However, as far as this corresponds to correctness, that is unknown to me. On the other hand, I know of diverse people who operate private gardens, that they use the wood ashes effectively as a natural garden fertilizer. Additionally, there is also to say that wood ashes are especially well suited for bestrewing on icy pathways, formerly were used as toothpaste in the past, and are also well suited as a good metal cleaning agent, like they, however, can also be used for soap making. In former times, wood ashes were also used as a good and non-burnable thermal insulating agent, and indeed by filling the hollow spaces when building houses. Thus, particularly wood ashes could and can be used as fertilizers, like they can also be used for other useful purposes. However, like I said, wood ashes, like also the plant ashes, are an old familiar valuable thing for fertilizing in the garden.
Everything which you have implemented may also be important for all those earth human beings, who concern themselves with agriculture and gardening, because with the whole thing, in regard to the EM, it deals with an effective, important matter, which should be taken into consideration and brought to the utilization. On my part, I am already knowledgeable for years concerning the emergence of EM. Therefore, I am not confronted with something new with what you have explained from the book EM Compact. That you now take over again at Quetzal's request the supervision and control over the garden and the greenhouse, which indeed brings you some extra work again, which you can, however, share with Silvano.
Silvano and I have also planned that.
And that will give Quetzal joy, wherewith I myself share this joy. Also, I have taken a look at the garden and the greenhouse, as Quetzal addressed me about that, and I must say that that which I have seen has equally shocked Quetzal and myself. And if I consider how everything was good, proper, and in order, as you have first worked and planted the garden and greenhouse together with Jacobus and then with Silvano, then I must say that that which had been done by others and what I have seen corresponds to a mismanagement and loveless, sad, neglected state.
Bang. That is clearly said. However, I assure you that from now on everything will be brought into order again.
I do not doubt that, if from now on you supervise over the tending of the garden and greenhouse yourself again.
Therefore, that is clear. Then I would like to say the following to you, before we concern ourselves with the term elimination again. Bernadette has reported to me that Chris in Poland occupies himself with the peace symbol, about which you and I have indeed already spoken with one another. Now Chris reported that he occupies himself intensively with the death rune, which indeed is being used worldwide as a false symbol of peace since a long time ago, and this has triggered very negative and bad consciousness impulsations and psyche impulsations in him. That is, in my opinion, however, only an inevitable consequence of the symbol of death. Likewise, the death rune, which works negatively and badly on the consciousness, the thoughts, feelings, and the psyche as such, which is why, ever since the symbol of death has been used as a false symbol of peace, the human beings, who falsely bind themselves to this symbol, get very badly out of the control of the good human nature in terms of the mental block consciousness, thoughts, feelings, psyche, and also in their ways of behavior. This occurs with innumerable human beings, wherewith the ones afflicted from this, however, vehemently deny this.
And what you said is correct. The rune of death, like each negative symbol, contains the characteristic in itself that it negatively influences the consciousness of the human being in a bad wise. The rune of death itself, which becomes used as a false symbol of peace, creates anxiety, unpeace, as however also hate and disharmony in the human being. That is the reason the human being, in regard to these unvalues, gets out of control of the good human nature, becomes indifferent, selfish, and contrary to his or her kind, and against a righteous regulation in the human and social area, in which case, paradoxically, this indifference goes forth with a blatant false humanity. The out-of-touch human being is afflicted by false humanitarianism, who is in regard to the reality and its truth, unknowing and inexperienced as well as weakened, wrong thinking and wrong feeling, and becomes driven by greed for possessions and greed for might, egoism, jealousy, and all sorts of personal profit-related calculus, wherewith the human being may not perceive and also may not understand these unvalues in himself or herself, while he or she is fully blind to his or her own wrong behavior. The false humanitarianism drives the human being also to revenge and retribution, wherewith very often religious sectarian aspects play a role in it, for which reason many false humanists advocate the death penalty and also acts of war, while they are of the wrong belief that thereby problems could become solved or prevented. 8. Alone already through this fact the false humanitarianism reveals itself, which unfortunately very often brings forth Ausartung 6, while the correct way of life isn't found, and therewith the false ideals become dwelled on, which manifoldly arise through religious sectarian irrational teachings.
About false humanism, Ausartung, and elimination of these factors with the human beings, we've spoken again and again since the start of our contacts, in which case, however, quite obviously were repeatedly misunderstood by the Earthlings several times, what y'all, the Plejarans, intrinsically mean with elimination. Unfortunately, the human beings of the Earth as a rule only now understand in relation to eliminating that something becomes fully extinguished, that is to say annihilated or killed. However, that does not correspond to rightness, because also in the terrestrial human language usage, this term means somewhat the same way, like with y'all, the Plejarans. Thus, to understand elimination is that a removal from a greater complex must result, therefore in the case of an Ausartung, or broad fallibility of a human being related to the society. Elimination simply means that something is superfluous, erroneous, insufficient or damage-bringing and so on, and must be disabled, that is to say, put aside, in which case a putting aside means nothing different than being separated, through which the fallible human or the Ausgertet's human being becomes specifically treated, and in a way, becomes cleared from the way, which is understandable as separating from, discarding, separating out, excreting, excluding, sorting out, expelling, sifting out, deporting, removing, treating separately, removing, isolating, isolatedly treated, neutralizing, separating, segregating, chasing away, casting out, and banishing. Therefore, the elimination means in no form that a fallible or ausgerteter human being shall become robbed of his or her life, that is to say, killed, because such an action would be against the creational natural laws and recommendations. If therefore, also at the beginning of our contact conversation from 1975, the discussion about elimination has been repeated, then that was always likewise meant in the sense named by me. However, it was never meant in the other way, that is to say, the kind and way that a life shall be extinguished, as unfortunately, like I know, becomes assumed by certain earthlings, who do not make an effort themselves to get to the reason of the term elimination, while they considered themselves clever enough in their unknowingness to understand the term correctly. If therefore a human being as a result of his or her Ausartung, like a felony and so on, shall be eliminated, then that doesn't mean that he or she shall be killed, rather that he or she shall be separated out from the society, like for example in regard to a punishment service in a prison or penitentiary, which becomes simply described as a place of fulfillment of guidelines according to y'all. Otherwise, an elimination to a place of fulfillment of guidelines can also mean a banishment to a particular place far from every society. It is clear to say that an elimination in this, and even according to the Plejarens' sense, means in no wise that an ausgertate's life is killed, rather that the life, likewise a human life, is separated out from the society in a secure place, where no disadvantages and no damage can arise any more for the society. One such elimination, that is to say, a human separated from the society, thus loses only his or her societal freedom, however not his or her life, like however also not all necessary possibilities for the sustainment of his or her life, while everything which is essential to life also becomes given to him or her with an elimination, institutionalization, or banishment to a relevant place of fulfillment of guidelines. As a rule, such an eliminated human being must work for his or her livelihood of life at the place of fulfillment of guidelines in question, and also learn to make himself or herself into a righteous human being, who, if he or she is not sent into banishment for life, becomes extensively reintegrated into society again through a resocialization and can lead a righteous life. And it is to be said once more that an elimination does not correspond to a killing, rather only to necessary segregation from the society or from an area, and so on. If the discussion is of life, that is unworthy of life, and ausgertatum six life, then that also applies.
And to which I can only say that your explanation corresponds amply to the rightness.
Good. Then I want to take up something that I have interest in, which your father, Svaoth, has said to me already, and about which, however, also you, Quetzal and Simyase, have spoken with me, that there is namely various material comets, like for example stone comets, metal comets, pure mineral comets, and ice comets, wherewith y'all have also said that water is not simply water, while there is various combinations regarding this. So far, everything is clear to me, yet now it really became established by the Rosetta probe. That is to say, Philae probe about the comet 67P/Churyumov-Gerasimenko, that this is hardcore and additionally covered with a thick, tough layer of dust, and is fully different than y'all have explained to me in regard to comets. Therefore the question, whether water exists or not, can nevertheless become established.
On the one hand, it is correct that water need not be the same water, that is to say, H2O, because there are still other chemical compositions regarding this, and on the other hand, it must be said that the comet 67P Churyumov-Gerasimenko belongs to another kind than those which have brought water to the Earth, because these were namely ice comets, and thus not comets of rock, like that one on which the Philae probe had landed. What now becomes analyzed through the probe on the comet and will become discovered, which I have not explored in advance, yet despite the near accident of the probe, it will be unquestionable that certain important data sets for the terrestrial scientists are expected. And if you speak of asteroids, which likewise have brought water to the ancient Earth, then that corresponds naturally to the rightness, wherewith, however, it must become understood that not only these were responsible for the emergence of water on the Earth, rather also the small and smallest water containing minerals, which fell down from the outer space, on the Earth. It must be understood also that water has developed itself on the Earth. Consequently, therefore, Not everything was brought here from the outer space via comets, asteroids, and minerals, because like on every planet, even on the Earth, an innate chemical process with its own dynamics, in regard to the origination of water, prevailed at early times. Consequently, also, the greatest part of the water is created on the planet itself. The water, that was brought via comets and asteroids to the Earth, is, however, small in relation to the large bodies of water, like seas, which through chemical processes of the Earth and its atmosphere and climate and so on, is created on the planets themselves, as well as through outer space influences.
Yes, your father Sva-Oth already said that, yet the scientists of the Earth are of the irrational insight that all water had been brought here from outer space, while they cannot imagine that the water developed itself through distinct chemical processes, also from planets themselves. Then, however, still this. In the Milky Way, planets tumble around, which don't circle around a home star, like, for example, the former destroyer, as well as the dark planet, which as nemesises also causes headaches for the terrestrial scientists. I indeed know from y'all about the actual existence of such dark planets or ghost planets, as Sva-Oth has once called them, which y'all, however, also called wandering planets, which wander around as great isolated outer space bodies in the Milky Way, and also in the cosmos, and even in the area of the Sol system, wherewith even the dark planet, Nemesis, shall also repeatedly penetrate into the inner solar system. 10 such free-wandering planets were discovered now by scientists, wherewith they describe these as orphan planets, and they estimate that there shall be double as many as there are stars. Astrophysicists say that it deals with large and Jupiter-like planets, which can be several times larger than Jupiter itself. These formations wander like a ghost through the cosmos and through the Milky Way, while they are held in orbit by no sun. These orphan planets, so the scientists think, are possibly, like said, more common than stars.
The scientists of the MOA Observatory. Micro-lensing observation in astrophysics in New Zealand have taken the center of the Milky Way under the magnifying glass, wherewith they actually discovered 10 orphaned planets, which orbit no sun. By that, it, however, doesn't deal with those dark planets, that is to say, wandering planets, which are calculable approximately with Earth size, or even 1 or 2 times larger, and which move on no fixed path through the Milky Way and through the cosmos, as well as through the Sol system, of which my father also reported to you. Many of these dark planets, that is to say wandering planets, move themselves without a firm path through the galactic external outer space, wherewith they only extremely rarely can become observed once from the Earth, with suitable instruments and apparatuses, if even at all. Contrary to that, the orphan planets, discovered by the scientists, move themselves namely into a stable orbit around a center in the galaxy, wherewith there are actually very many of them. The orbit can be both around the center of the galaxy, like, however, also far into the outer areas of the solar system. Compared to sun formations, these planets are relatively small, which explains why they have been overlooked by the terrestrial scientists so far, which will, however, change now, since they have gained and accordingly sought relevant knowledge regarding this.
Then that is also clarified. Lately we have spoken about the ocean pollution and other pollutants in bodies of water with plastic and other synthetic substances, to which I now have the question on the one hand, whether in the meantime you could answer and clarify my request of how much plastic and other synthetic substances end up in the bodies of water in Switzerland per year, and pollute these bodies of water. On the other hand, a broadcast was shown on television, which was related to this exact subject matter. Consequently, I have looked it up on the internet, what comes up in Switzerland regarding this. There too I have found the following and copied it out. Link.
I cannot answer your question in this wise, that I could state an exact measure for you in regard to the total extent of water pollution through synthetic materials in Switzerland, because for that purpose, exact research would be necessary. Thus, I can only mention a result of our calculations, which correlates itself to around 5 metric tons of plastic waste and other synthetic waste products, which get into the Swiss bodies of water and in the land areas per month and which degrade themselves, for the most part, on the floors of the bodies of water, decompose themselves there and turn into microplastic, which is not absolutely harmless, rather impairs the environment and is very health damaging for completely all other life forms on land and in the water. If therefore, it becomes explained in this internet excerpt that there exists no immediate danger to the environment and the health, then that corresponds on one hand in regard to the statements of the responsible researchers and scientists, who themselves assume unfactually the case of an inexcusable research slovenliness and short-sightedness, as well as a trivialization of the real danger and harmfulness of the whole matter. And on the other hand, an irresponsible assertion becomes implied with this statement, which fundamentally contradicts the effective reality and its truth. This is because the already existing condition of the water contamination through plastic and other synthetic substances has far exceeded the harmless amount, especially in the form of the microplastic. Already great parts of nature and the general environment become damaged, like also the health of the human beings and of the water life forms, the birds, the mammal world, the animal world, the amphibians, and the reptiles. However, this does not fully reflect the deteriorating amount in Switzerland, because along with the pollution through plastic and other synthetic substances, still come in addition to all sorts of other poisonous and non-poisonous waste substances, which likewise irresponsibly become tossed into the bodies of water, like however also in the fields, gardens, on streets and paths, as well as in the meadows and woods, and which contribute their dangerous part to damage or even destroy the health of the human being and of all other life forms, as well as the entire flora. So already thousands of forms of life of all genera and species mutate in the fauna through this irresponsibility, in order to adapt themselves via mutation to the alterations summoned through the fault of the human beings. This, if they are able to survive their mutation and do not die out.
The Swiss BAFU, that is to say, Federal Agency for the Environment, the Professional Administration for Environment, and for the sustainable usage of the natural resources, as well as for the environmental protection, like also the ETH, Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, are responsible for the evaluation, which became compiled. If those now, however, claim that everything represents neither an endangerment for the environment nor for the healthiness, then this irresponsibility corresponds to a non-acknowledgement of the actuality and of the truth, as well as of false leading in regard to the population.
So you can say that because it corresponds to an extensive misguidance and downplaying of the effective facts and actualities. In truth, through the decay of plastics and other synthetic substances, the finest nanoparticles accrue to such an extent that these cannot become detected by a superficial quality control and analysis of microplastic and other synthetic substances, while namely, profound methods of the investigations and analyses are required for their detection as only superficial methods. Exactly, these nanoparticles are the greatest effective danger for the health of the human being and for all life forms of fauna and of flora of all kinds, because they impair all their organic functions and summon serious health damages and even mutations. Yet that is not everything, because especially the plastic has the characteristic to bind PCB onto itself, which gets into the bodies of water as well as into the soil and into the environment through the irresponsibility of the earth human beings. With the PCB, it deals with polychlorinated biphenyl, that is to say, with poisonous and cancer-causing organic chlorine compounds, which gets into the bodies of water early on through inattentiveness and irresponsibility of the earth human beings worldwide, remain existent a very long time and bind themselves onto the plastic, which becomes inattentively and irresponsibly tossed out, and likewise gets into all bodies of water, into the soil, generally gets into the environment, and into the atmosphere of the earth. If the plastic, like also all other synthetic substances, in the course of time are ground to bits and dissolve into microplastic and ultimately into tiny nanoparticles, then the PCB remains contained in it and has damaging effect upon the health of all forms of life, be it life forms of the water and land, or even the human being. Exactly that, however, becomes trivialized by the BAFU and the ETH, which corresponds to an irresponsibility which is not easy to surpass. The PCBs are today still effective in the environment, in the soil, and in the bodies of water, even if they were used decades ago. Thereby, it deals with a product of the terrestrial chemical industry economy, and indeed around very toxic substances, which already, as of the year 1929, are finding their way into the manufacturing and into a multifaceted usage, like, for example, in hydraulic facilities as a hydraulic fluid, especially in electrical capacitors, in fluorescent lamps, that is to say fluorescent tubes, as well as in transformers, washing machines, spin dryers, and in other devices with capacitor motors. PCBs were also used for industrial facilities for reactive current compensation, like even as plasticizers in sealants, insulating materials, synthetic substances, and lacquers, etc. With that, it deals with the liquids, which are yellowish and approximately odorless in pure form. The known organic toxic substances become labeled as the so-called dirty dozen by the terrestrial scientists. Admittedly, the PCB became banned worldwide in the year 2001 by the Stockholm Convention, which, however, could not prevent that these very dangerous and extremely health-damaging toxic substances could spread out everywhere upon the earth and in the bodies of water, poisoned by the same token, like also the atmosphere and the soil of many places. And with that, the toxic substances are preserved up until today through the plastic nanoparticles, etc., and become taken up by forms of life of all kind as food, like, however, also through skin contact. While certain organisms can break down PCB due to the lack of nitrogen, those organisms cannot live off of these toxins alone, and they cannot find the important nutrition anywhere else. Their biology does not break it down very well, which has the worse result that they could accumulate the plastic in themselves, and with that, also the microplastic and nanoplastic. Earlier, also PCB and PCB-containing insulating oils became integrated into the capacitor manufacturing, whereas the capacitors, by mechanical destruction or as a result of the disintegration processes, became leaky and released the PCB, where it contaminated the surroundings. The chlorodiphenols smells intensively fruity in small quantities compared to other insulating oils, and additionally it is already dangerous if this comes in contact with the skin while it becomes taken up through the pores. The effects on the health could be very drastic if a chronic toxicity occurs, which already can appear by meager amounts. The PCBs produce effects like chloracin. Like they, however, also produce hair loss, hyperpigmentation, and an immune system damage through immune poisoning, as well as all sorts of sufferings of cancer, like, however, also Alzheimer's, liver damages, Parkinson's, and deformities, and so on. PCBs accumulate biologically in the food chain and are also strong carcinogens in this wise. 5. Also, the physical and consciousness-based development becomes impaired through PCBs, as this also hormonally negatively affects, like, for example, in regard to the hormone balance of male fetuses and children, whom they disturb. Also, they promote the infertility in men and male mammals in great measure, in all kinds of animals, in amphibians, reptiles, fish, and birds, with which, however, also other diverse hormonal-related diseases, sufferings, and feminization occurs. Even the smallest absorbed amounts of PCBs are harmful, therefore also absorbed substances are tainted with these poisons through plastic nanoparticles. Thus, contaminated particles with PCBs are extremely harmful to health, if these poisonous substances get into the organic circulation of the earth human or other life forms through plastic excretions as well as through microplastic and nanoparticles originating from that. The poisons accumulate themselves in the organisms of all forms of life, which stand at the beginning or end of the food chain, and they proceedingly become poisoned through their ingestion of food or through physical contact with PCBs. And that is concealed by the responsible researchers and scientists is absolutely incomprehensible and even criminal and contemptuous of life.
That can't be any different, really. However, something else. You have said that you want in regard to the book by Guido, that also my name shall become cited by the author naming on the cover. To that end, Bernadette thinks that also your name belongs on it, while we both together have indeed fundamentally edited the work. What do you think about that?
Yes, it should thus be the right way indeed wherewith I can be in agreement.
And then that is also clear. Wherewith, however, there is also to say that everyone be named by name and area of work, who, until now, have worked together on the book, be it from the manuscript work of Elizabeth, about yours and my total work of editing, the preparation work, the pre- and post-work from Bernadette, up to all correction collaborators.
And that is rightly so, because not only one person is decisively involved alone in making this book, rather it unifies itself alone in the preparatory work with so many collaborators that these rightfully are to be named, and to be cited by the names.
It becomes made so, like you said, that is a clear case.
Clarification. Weltenraum Figu Dictionary word, outer space. This is the area just beyond the exosphere, but not too far into outer space, literally the space the world lives near. Tonnen. An imperial ton is different than a metric ton. A British ton is 2,240 pounds, and an American ton is 2,000 pounds, while a metric ton is 1,000 kilograms, which is approximately 2,205 pounds. Effective microbes? Asian Natural Farming Forum at Permies, https:/Permies. Com, T82662 effective microbes. Trump's EPA doesn't want you to know chemicals in Teflon are poisoning waterways and firefighters. YouTube, https:/w. YouTube. Com, watch. V =YB9CLBP0B4. Plastic pollution is creating a global crisis of waste. YouTube, https:/w. YouTube. Comwatch. V =0M_I8 UXTDC US R10. The getting out of control of the good human nature.